Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Saul, alongside my co host here, Dave. And today we have the privilege of being joined by Austin Federa. Austin is the head of strategy at the Solana Foundation and previously head of comms at Solana Foundation and Solana Labs. Before that, he's been a senior product marketing manager at Bison Trails, as well as director of marketing at Republic. Been in crypto for a while. And it's great to have you here, Austin. It's been a long time since I think the three of us have caught up, and things have changed substantially in both
Yeah,
crypto
they
and
really
Solana.
have. Yeah, thanks for having me on today. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, I guess maybe we start with that actually. I think the last time we talked was almost a year ago, and things were very much bear market vibes. Um, since then, I think Solana has really cemented itself as kind of that a top tier blue chip ecosystem, or what have you. What has that been like from your perspective? I think for the longest time, even like previous bear market, one of the criticisms of Solana was that they weren't quote unquote aggressive enough in pursuing BD, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Um, and now it's almost inverse, where a lot of ecosystems and companies and projects are seeking out Solana. And that's been a great tailwind for the ecosystem. But from your perspective, like, how did this all look?
Yeah. I mean, the secret is we're still not that aggressive in pursuing BD. The approach has always been at the foundation that teams that want to build on Solana, that see the promise and potential of the network, that understand the characteristics of what you can build on Solana, which are different than what you can build on any other network today. Those people are the ones we want to work with. There's a certain amount that marketing and other folks do about making sure people are aware of what the capabilities are on the Solana network, like new features like token extensions really change what you can now build on the network. But most of that work are people who are already interested in building serious projects on blockchain, and they're now coming to us, or we're getting connected with them. And so the work of business development, if you can call it that, at a nonprofit software foundation,
Yeah,
it is sort of always a bit of a strange one because we're not selling anything. It's not like, we as the foundation get any money if someone adopts. In fact, in crypto, usually you're giving money to people to build on a specific network. And I think we actually have one of the more responsible and controlled grants programs of any of the foundations out there. But it's one of those things where if you try and fit a square peg in a round hole and you're trying to give people money, they're going to take the money even if the peg doesn't fit. And so I think there's a mistake that can be made, and I saw a lot of people calling for this in the bear market of like,
mhm.
why are you not being more aggressive on business development? Well, how many of those BD deals that Solana quote unquote lost have actually worked out? Are actually real products that are deployed that people are actually using, and how many of them were kind of just press releases?
100%. And that's been something that when I was in talking to people about layer ones at my previous job, it was always like a strong point for something like a Polygon. It's like, oh, but their BD is great. I'm like, if a layer one needs BD to get adoption, then that doesn't bode well for the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's good uses for BD teams as well. So, something like Visa. So Visa chose to, scale their settlement pilot project in USDC on Solana because they needed the speed and performance of the network. Now, that was something that they independently decided to do. There was no grant or commercial terms associated with something like that. But it did take them talking to us. There's a role for BD in these situations. It's getting, product people from Visa to talk to engineers who work on core engineering at Solana Labs and Anza and the Solana Foundation, and getting them connected with other people in the ecosystem who can say, hey, I get what you're trying to build. We've actually built something similar. Here's some open source code you can look at. So the role of like BD when it's like working perfectly is basically a big ecosystem router, and it's just connecting ecosystem teams to other teams that are looking to build in the ecosystem. And it's doing, quite frankly, not a lot of like what we would call capital W work. It's doing a ton of process work and a ton of routing work. And so, this is very different than a normal, company or corporate organization because we're a blockchain foundation. But even so, the most successful work of BD is when the work they're doing is unblocking people. And they're unblocking people in a way that completely remove the Solana Foundation from the loop in any future development or work on the network.
I suppose tying in with that and trying to attract institutions is what you've already mentioned, the token extensions program. It seems to be a real step forward in terms of what we're seeing on Solana versus what we've previously seen on other public blockchains. If you
Yeah.
could just go into what you think maybe the big unlocks are going to be from that, and how that's going to help with attracting institutions.
Yeah, so token extensions is a new framework that was pretty much 2.5 years in the work. John Chingue at Solana Labs, now Anza, was sort of the chief architect of what that system would look like. And that took about, 2.5 years to build and architect out. But token extensions is a new program, a new token program on the network that is sort of the next generation of the existing token program. And token extensions adds a bunch of features, optionalities, and flags that developers can enable to build different types of products on blockchain. And one of the main unlocks here is its one token program. So some of the stuff you can do with token extensions have been possible before on other networks, but something like a regulated issuer of, real world assets would have to assemble maybe 5 different smart contracts together to get the same functionality you can get in one program. But sort of to go back, like what are token extensions? These are a whole series of additional controls and capabilities on the token level as opposed to on the smart contract level. So one of the examples of this is a transfer hook. Transfer hooks can be used in a ton of different ways, but sort of the easiest explanation is it's like an authorization check on a credit card. So if you and I are going to be exchanging USDC, there's a transfer hook that might be called in the middle there that says, "Hey, is this person on a terrorist watch list? Is this address listed in the OFAC database somewhere?" And that
Right.
transfer then could be blocked. And that's not very degen, but also stablecoins are not very degen. They're literally fiat currency on the blockchain, and so they have to abide by all the government rules and regulations around moving fiat currency. But you can also use transfer hooks in lots of like very degen ways. You can say, "Hey, this wallet actually can't hold uh, you know, any tokens if it doesn't have at least 10,000 of another token in it. I can't buy this meme coin unless I also have this NFT in my wallet." So you can use these things in many different ways, but the goal of the token extensions program is to make it so no one ever has to build a private blockchain again.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to touch upon is, do you think that this does away with a lot of the arguments for building app chain specific blockchains?
Yeah, there's a few regulatory moats that exist for like a few jurisdictions. The regulators basically are requiring that people who are issuing certain types of assets control all of the validators in their network anyway. Now, that's not a blockchain at that point, right? When you have
Mhm.
a full corporate entity with full control over the system, yes, you're using blockchain technology, but it's not a public blockchain in the way any of us think of a public blockchain. Like California Registry of Motor Vehicles is technically using a blockchain now, but it's not a blockchain in any meaningful way because they control the whole thing. They're just using it for data verification. Um, and so, there's a few regulatory moats that still exist there. But at this point, you can do something on Solana now, like take a tokenized equity, right? Take a Tesla shares or something like that. If you have the regulatory license to do it, you can tokenize that and you can actually make it freely tradable on chain as long as all the users' wallet addresses have gone through a KYC process. So you can set up a KYC portal on your website. I come and I connect my Phantom wallet or Soulflare wallet or whatever it is. I pass KYC and they drop a non transferable NFT into the wallet or they just whitelist the address. And suddenly I can trade regulated securities and I don't have to trade them by changing, the network in my MetaMask to go select some weird subnet somewhere. This is just on the Solana mainnet. And, one of the really cool things about this is it can interact with traditional DeFi as well. You can have regulated assets and non-regulated assets coexisting on the same DeFi marketplaces, and, there's limitations on, if I go try and buy something that I'm not KYC'd for, the transaction won't go successfully. But it also means I can go to something like Jupiter and as long as I'm permissioned to do these types of activities, I can actually access a ton of different markets for things that you wouldn't think of as being tradable normally on DeFi.
Can we talk about, because there's a lot of interesting things with token extensions that are pretty exciting. Um, so like recently, Monero, which was an OG privacy coin, got
Yeah.
delisted from Binance, and I noticed one of the new features with extensions is native support for privacy. But can we dig into what does that actually mean? Because I don't think I've ever seen in layer one or what have you, kind of just add privacy in, years after it launched,
Yeah.
as kind of this optional feature. And I noticed there's some language on the website around like the ability to still preserve auditing rights, which is, I think, how you guys make this compliant in a way. So maybe tell us a bit about how the privacy works here.
Yeah, so the feature you're talking about is called confidential transfers. And confidential transfers are actually very different than private transfers. So a private transfer like Monero has, or through something like Tornado Cash, those are transactions where the sender is masked, the token is masked, the amount is masked, and the recipient is masked. Confidential transfers actually just mask one component, which is the value transferred. So if you and I were to do a confidential transfer, someone looking in from the outside could see that both of our wallets with our normal public keys transacted, and you could even see the token we used. Maybe it was USDC or some other stablecoin. What you would not be able to see is how much money was transferred. And so this is sort of designed for a very different use case than what these sort of true privacy technologies. And we have true privacy technologies on Solana too. We have Light and Elusive that are full ZK systems. But confidential transfers are really more designed for something like payroll, where, your business may be like, look, we can save a ton of money if we pay you in a stable coin on chain, and you'd actually love that. But I don't know, maybe one of the co-hosts gets twice as high ratings and gets a little bit higher salary than the other, and you don't want to necessarily make all that public too, right? So it's really designed for those sorts of use cases, or, cases where a business wants to accept a stable coin, but because they're a publicly traded company, there's actually laws requiring them not to leak revenue data outside of the quarterly earnings period. And so if anyone can just query the chain and say, wow, looks like, the coffee shop, a bad example because they aren't publicly traded, but the Apple store in Williamsburg, like, wow, they did, $4 million last week in USDC sales. Like that information actually should not be made public outside of a reporting period requirement. So there's all sorts of business use cases where confidential transfers are really kind of important. Confidential transfers also have to be enabled by the token issuer. So you can't just declare, I'm going to send this token confidentially. It has to be something that is created by the issuer. And that's where the auditability comes in. So obviously in this model, I can decrypt my transfer and you can decrypt the transfer because we're both parts of that transfer. But the token issuer can also decrypt that balance amount. And so that allows them to do things like hand over an audit key to a third party auditor that can actually audit these transactions and say, yes, the revenue the company reported is actually the revenue that came in. Or the company could insert a third party in the line that, is checking for things like, balances outside of a certain amount. And maybe those get flagged for additional review or something along those lines. So there really are the kind of security safeguards and compliance safeguard that businesses need built into it. But, if you are sort of like the true, Bitcoin bunker person, like confidential transfers is not the feature you're looking for. That would be something where a true ZK system like Light or Elusive is able to offer that.
So we've got quite a few factors all coming together. We have Visa working on Solana, trying to facilitate a sandbox really at the moment, but
Yeah.
trying to facilitate payments. We've got these webhooks, which will allow centralized corporations to withhold stablecoins. What is holding back payments on blockchains? Do you think now all the pieces are in place, or do we still need additional things before we can hopefully start seeing massive amounts of payments happening on the chain?
Yeah. So, I mean, the cop out answer is there's always more things to be built, right? The real answer, I think, is token extensions unlocks a ton of this for folks and for businesses. And we're already seeing a lot of these organizations look at adopting token extensions as sort of a real massive unlock for what's able to be done in blockchain payments. The on-ramping and off-ramping is still not at the level to which I think most consumers would expect. Um, On-ramping, if you're not going through an exchange, usually has somewhere around a 1% to 3% fee. Off-ramping still often has a 1 to 3% fee. Those are fees that are basically in line with credit cards, and at that point, that's not a particularly compelling vision for consumers. Merchants, it's a little different, right? You can spend money and you can get a Circle corporate account. Those corporate accounts are not designed for individuals. And so the on-ramping, I think, is still an area where there's a lot of, like, headway still to be made. I think we've all had the experience of, like, you've had an account with an exchange for a year, you try and transfer some money into it, and suddenly your account's locked out for 7 days for literally no reason. This is the problem with on-ramps as they are now, is that a lot of them are not stable and predictable enough to be that daily source. So I think the vision and the future I hope we get to in a pretty short order is that payroll companies are actually starting to integrate stablecoins into their payout systems. So the same way, if you get paid, through direct deposit, you can link a bank account. You should be able to link a wallet address too, and say, yeah, maybe dump half of my paycheck to my bank account, but dump half of it on chain as well. And suddenly that becomes a much faster onboarding flow, which then gets people to have balances on chain, and that's where I think peer-to-peer payments and peer-to-merchant payments really start to take off. And this is sort of the what PayPal did for the internet in, like, 2004, 2005, 2006. In that period of time, it was, like, kinda scary to go on eBay and buy something, right? And
Mm.
PayPal really changed that, but also having a sort of balance on your PayPal account made people more comfortable spending digital money. And I think we're gonna see a similar transformation with stablecoins as networks get fast enough that you can actually have experiences that rival or exceed their Web 2 counterparts.
That actually is it's a pretty brilliant strategy. Instead of praying that millions of people, you know, use Coinbase and buy Solana or USDC, start with the merchants and kind of create incentives to have people just have it in their bank account or their wallet rather, some portion of their paycheck. I could see that working really well, especially if you just a few big companies start doing it and it kind of just explodes from there. Um, on the payments front, actually, since we're talking about it, what is going on with, I guess, like Coinbase's complete refusal to acknowledge that Solana exists?
It's a long story. I will say there are great people at Coinbase who have been advocates for the Solana network since the beginning. Andrew's one of those people. Victor also, who came over from the Bison Trails acquisition years ago as part of Coinbase Cloud. Jonathan on the ventures team over there. There's lots of great people at Coinbase who are advocates for Solana
Mhm.
internally. The wallet team is looking more seriously at things like Solana Pay now and some of those different applications. I think anytime you're dealing with a large publicly traded company, revenue is really important to them on that. And I think this is obviously public because it was a public grant, but, like,
Yeah.
Coinbase has a lot of OP, and that's why they built Base on the Optimism stack, is because they received a large grant to do that. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think that is something to keep in mind, is that they do have revenue incentives aligned with, one of the Ethereum L2 stacks at this point. And over time, I think we're gonna see them very much diversify that and support, Solana as the second largest smart contract platform at this point. There's great folks over there working on it, but I do understand why, they chose to prioritize EVM development ahead, especially considering some of the revenue alignment there.
I think another way maybe that people are going to start getting paid rather than going through the pain of going through centralized exchanges is they start actually just being paid in crypto for work. And the obvious example there would be DePIN projects,
Yeah.
starting to pay people to lend their GPU power or their wireless or whatever it may be. So, what are your views on the burgeoning DePIN projects, and what are you excited about for potentially future
Yeah.
projects?
I mean, I really like the DePIN model is, I'd say, after payments, it
Mhm.
is like the most product market fit we've ever had in blockchain. Stablecoins are obviously, like, well, I wouldn't say obviously. At the start, no one thought it was going to be the case, but stablecoins are the most successful product on blockchain by far.
Mhm.
I think DePIN is a very close second. Currently, it's probably DeFi that's second, but DePIN, I think, will overtake DeFi in pretty short order. This is partially because the idea is just it's so viral. Like, I'm going to get paid for doing things I used to have to pay for. And that is a crazy model, right? And it's one of those ideas that sounds as insane probably as capitalism did when someone first pitched capitalism, hundreds of years ago. Because the idea that, like, what the market is just going to magically know what products and services people need and provide them. Like, are you kidding? We have to plan all of this, right? That was the thing beforehand. And DePIN is really the same way. It's like, no, no, no. We need a centralized company to know where people need wireless service so they can go and they can put up cell phone towers. It's like, I don't know, man. I think people will actually put up coverage where they need coverage. And yes, you'll probably need some centralized companies to go out and, put up cell coverage in really rural areas or along highways or something like that. But for most of the world, most people live in urban environments now, and they have a much better sense of where they do and don't have cell coverage than the company would. On top of that, the trade-off with DPIN of saying, not only can I get paid for providing coverage, but I can be paid for providing data. So with Helium Mobile, they have this whole mapper system where it is basically logging the signal. If you opt into it, it's logging the signal strength that comes in on your phone, and it's building one of those hexagon maps of cell phone coverage. Now, the big wireless carriers spend huge amounts of money actually sending people out into the field with specialized equipment, and they're probably paid 40 to 60 bucks an hour to walk around and take measurements at different places. Now, the quality of measurement you get off a phone is much lower than one of these specialized devices, but the specialized device probably only measures once a year at best. If you have people walking every day, 50 times a day, getting signal strength data, your aggregate composite picture of the signal strength in that location is going to be way better than any of that static measurement, especially because radio attenuation with humidity and temperature changes is a real thing. And so, this model, then you take it out and you apply it to HiveMapper, and you say the camera in a HiveMapper dashboard, dash cam, is lower quality than a Google Street View camera. No question about it. But we have 500 photos from all different lighting conditions on this road, and we can take AI and build composite images from this. And we've been doing this with iPhones for years. And those image quality and that image sort of time resolution can rival and exceed these centralized companies like Google Street View. And like that is a whole category of unlock that's coming for all sorts of different types of areas right now that we currently believe a centralized carrier can provide the best service. That is not necessarily going to be the case in the future.
And Austin, just a follow up, but I heard you speak on a podcast recently that you believe that space is the next frontier to be conquered by deep in projects. I'd love just
Yeah.
you to give us the overview there.
Yeah. So I think, as we all know, the major part of the internet that's still centralized are the fiber cables. There's not actually that many undersea fiber cables or overland fiber cables, and there's maybe 25 companies that own them, and fewer companies own the vast majority of them. The physical world is really tightly bound in rules and regulations, and if you've ever tried to do anything on your property in the United States, or anywhere in Europe, that there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through just to be able to do something like put up a fence. So space really is, I think, the next era for DePIN. Now, this is probably 5 to 10 years out, but you could see a decentralized wireless network like Starlink, but instead of being owned by one company, it is, and I'm not saying this is necessarily going to be individuals launching satellites, but cohorts of individuals, right? You team up with a group of 50 people, you raise funds, you launch a satellite, and there's now a constellation of diverse ownership running a whole new set of internet pipes in space. And I think this is a really massive area over the long term, to see projects expand into and really start to build a like truly user owned version of Web3, uh, down to the pipe level. And for me, that is an incredibly exciting and interesting vision.
So I totally agree that DePIN will be one of, I think, the most important and widely used applications of blockchains. Um, One other area that I think people have been talking about for a very long time, that you'll see plastered on every kind of ecosystem's website is gaming. And what's interesting about Solana is some people will say, and I'm one of these people, that Solana is a great fit for games because of the composability. But then some take the complete opposite view and say that studios want to own a subnet or an app chain and have full control, and kind of your shrapnels of the world lean into that design.
Yeah.
Um, but as you guys have talked to, I'm sure, many gaming companies or projects that want to build games, I mean, how do you see these two kind of approaches playing out over time? Certainly, I wouldn't say there's a ton of games on Solana today, but some of the bigger ones like StepN have really gone, borderline mainstream, and it's definitely a category I think that I'm really excited about in the next bull run.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to, I would say, even our early conversation about what is the role of business development. If you're a game developer and you're coming in and say, I want to build a game on blockchain, but I want to retain full control of the game, the assets, the economy, the authority, who can sign up, who can use, I want to be able to rewind the chain if we need to. You're not building on blockchain for the right reason. You're building on blockchain for a grant. And that's okay, I guess, right? Games don't have to be all decentralized. Games don't have to truly be built on blockchain. Most 99% of games today are run by centralized for-profit companies and they're awesome, right? They're the games we know and love and play and like that works pretty well. Gamers are sometimes mad at the economics and they're mad at some of how the decisions are made and governed, but the game quality is still high enough that at the end of the day, we all suck it up and still play games. Then you have companies like Star Atlas, which is taking a completely different approach to this sort of thing. They're trying to put as much as possible on chain. All their in-game economies where you're going to be able to, go and buy and sell items and craft. Uh, Under the hood, that is just DeFi. That is just DeFi order markets with a beautiful user interface. But the actual game too, like they're looking at like what parts of games can you actually put on chain? The movement engine, the combat engines, at least the results that come out of that stuff. And that's a very different commitment to actually building games on blockchain. So I think we're still at a place where like the games industry moves very slowly. It's very money driven. Um, so far, no one has built a $500 million a year revenue enterprise on blockchain that's decentralized yet. I think Star Atlas, when they actually launched their full game, they're the best shot I've seen at sort of proving that path out for other game developers to follow. There's lots of sort of smaller, fun to play, sort of more casual games on Solana that are getting built on chain at this point, and those are awesome to see. But I really think it's gonna take, a AAA or close to AAA quality game to really show the industry you can build stuff that's just as compelling and actually get more players if you built it on blockchain. The same way it took, 5 or 7 years for mobile gaming to be considered a first class citizen.
That's fair. But do you think that, because given it feels to me like the next bull run is going to probably peak at some point in 2025, just throwing a dart at the board, but that feels like the timeline. Do you think we'll see something by then? Like I think a lot of people's best trades were like Axiom Step In, for instance, last cycle. Do you see a world where like that kind of theme plays out again, or maybe is it just some completely different vertical within crypto that ends up being the dominant narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say gaming dominated the last cycle. I think there were certain, if anything, like NFTs dominated the last cycle, right? And so there were components of games that really caught on, like Step In, but the staying power of Step In, I think, has been less than a lot of people anticipated it might be. So
Yeah,
what I'm really interested in is things like Star Atlas, is the ability to have a compelling experience that is not inherently or not primarily financial, right? And I think this is where a lot of the gaming narrative has historically broken down. Is are you playing to earn? Are you working to earn? Right? That's always
Mhm.
been the challenge with blockchain games is most of them are not enough fun that you just keep playing them. And if they were, like they'd have social networks built around them and those sorts of things. Like no one plays Call of Duty or Halo because they're getting paid to play, right? Now, except some people who are like true professionals, but 99% of those of gamers are just having fun with friends. And so I think the marrying of quality games and like Web3 social, that is actually an area I think we could see a ton of adoption in because Web3 social is getting better than it used to be. Web3 games are getting more Web3 than they used to be. There's an intersection point there. Is it 2024? Is it 2025? Is it 2026? I don't know. Games take a long time to build. Good games specifically take a long time to build, and blockchain things take a long time to build. So I'm not sure exactly where those two things are going to meet, but I do think that's what we need to see for real adoption to kick off here.
I think one of the other big unlocks that we've seen from Solana in the last year or so is compression and, in particular, compressed NFTs. How do you see that progressing over the next couple of years? Because 10K PFP collections, it seems to be slightly dead at the minute.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got what Drip's doing, and then there's this whole other piece about NFTs being used for real world assets. So, how are you seeing that space emerging?
Yeah, I mean, the one of the nice things about compression getting used initially through Drip and through sort of those types of applications is it helped prove out the technology for use in things like, as you're saying, real world assets. And so now there are a bunch of new sort of NFT light standards that are not really designed for images, but they're designed for inscribing, well, bad word of inscribing, with recording metadata on chain that's relevant to different types of things. So if you have a, tokenized equity, you probably need to attach a serial number to that because while one Tesla share and another Tesla share are completely interchangeable, if you want to redeem them someday, it's nice to know this share is custodied at this location and I can go look that up in some off-chain registry. Same with treasury notes or carbon credits or something along those lines. So the technology with compression really has allowed NFTs to scale out way further than most people anticipated. I mean, Drip is spending something like $1,000 per million NFT that they distribute. Those numbers are pretty good. And the goal is over time to get those numbers even better. And that is kind of the long-term goal here is across the Solana network in general to push the cost of transactions and to creating things like tokens and NFTs as low as possible, based on the economic support of the network and get to a place where it is not cost prohibitive to do stuff like mint NFTs on chain for every single item in your game that's built on blockchain or, tokenize hundreds of millions of individual equities and treasury bonds and deposits and all these sorts of things.
Let's talk a bit about the mobile strategy. Saga has been around for a little over a year at this point. I was one of the earlier buyers of it. For the longest time, there was not a whole lot to do on it. It wasn't even Helium Mobile. I had to use Google Fi.
Yeah.
But now there's increasingly more and more applications. There's all these airdrops, and that first batch, people essentially made money on it. And now with Chapter Two, I think you guys crossed 100,000 pre-orders, which is insane. What's that been like internally to watch this project? Because we even interviewed Steven like way back in March or April.
Yeah.
And it felt like, it was struggling to get off the shelves. It went on sale pretty early, and then now it's just like 100K pre-orders for. I don't even think challengers to the iPhone back like 5 years ago hit that many sales. Like it's insane. What's that been like internally? Now it seems like you guys are, in a sense, doubling down on mobile in a way.
Yeah, it's been pretty awesome to see. Unfortunately, I haven't actually had an insider seat to that project because it is fully housed at Solana Labs.
Yeah.
And so, Solana Mobile really is its own division within Solana Labs, doing its own thing. I have not seen what the chapter two looks like. I have not seen
Oh.
renderings of how that, phone is actually going to come together or what the specs are or anything like that. So, the really cool part for me is because I was a part of the original saga and the original vision there of the Solana mobile stack that totally had, and sort of helping refine and build that out. And to see that now sort of be standing on its own, be seen as like pretty groundbreaking and probably ahead of its time, but now probably about at the right time is really awesome to see. And that team there has just been grinding for the last 2 years to refine that thing and really make it work. And I think as you're saying, the original Saga, like, it was expensive. It hit a weird part in the market when, like, all of these other new phones were coming out and crypto was crashing, and there were concerns about, is mobile ever gonna be real on phones and stuff? But we have passkeys now. We have all these new, like, technologies that feel like they're finally ready, and so I have high hopes for Chapter 2, um, for it to be a device that, as we've already seen, is a much lower price point, much more broad adoption, hopefully a lot more adoption throughout Asia, as well because of the lower price point. And so I'm excited to see kind of what happens with it. But unfortunately, I don't really have any insider perspective on it because it's totally run by an independent company.
Oh man, didn't know. I didn't
Yeah.
know. But have you heard or spoken with teams that might want to create unique experiences for mobile? How are you guys thinking about just broadly, like what you could do with crypto on mobile phones? I think that wasn't really a thing the last cycle. Now it feels like a bit
Yeah.
more infrastructure to support those use cases.
Yeah. I mean, back in the last cycle, Solana was really the only blockchain that was cheap enough and fast enough to have mobile experiences. I think if the whole L2, L3, L27 vision plays out correctly, you will actually have fast enough blockchains in the non-Solana space that people can actually build mobile applications and, do things like cover fees and build compelling user experiences and sort of, you know, the main difference between like E-Trade and Robinhood was that the entire UX stack of mobile from Plaid and being able to link a bank account and all these other things got good enough that people actually could trade on their phones as opposed to trading on their desktop. And I don't think there's one technology you can point to and say, "Oh, this is what made, Robinhood able to exist." It was a whole series of things that all came together to support that moment of sort of the fintech app revolution, and I think we're gonna probably see something very similar with crypto and hopefully soon. Hopefully, the Solana mobile stack in chapter 2 kind of lead the charge there. But part of this is what's really important is the Solana mobile stack is fully open source. Any OEM, any manufacturer can take this stack and they can integrate it into their Android phone. And other people, if they want to build support for other networks, they can actually go submit a PR to the repo and create a proposal for how the Solana mobile stack could support the Ethereum networks, and maybe we rename it to the Web3 mobile stack. And that's actually true success. Like the goal here is to grow the pie because growing the pie helps every network. And, if the only network that has mobile experiences is Solana, that's also going to hamper the growth of mobile consumer facing crypto as well.
Um, would love just to turn to L1 governance. I
Mhm.
know it's a topic which you've discussed a little bit in the recent past on various podcasts, but what's the route to effectively making Solana Foundation redundant in the next 10 years or so? Is that what governance would entail?
I think people talk about governance in a lot of different ways, and they're usually pretty unclear what they mean by that. So, from a practical standpoint, the governance of the Solana protocol is Jito, Fire Dancer, Anza, Foundation. And we're rapidly adding to that the folks at who are building the Zig client named Sig. It's basically everyone building core validator clients. Now we also have the SIMD process for Solana improvement proposals, and that's kind of where the stuff lives today. Now the question is like adoptions of new features, how do core teams build out support for this type of thing? That is really what the governance level is of it. You're not going to see the Solana Foundation have a DAO for like, token grants and those sorts of things because it's just a massive administrative overhead and it's not the point and vision of the Solana Foundation. It's dedicated to the advancement, adoption, decentralization, and security of the Solana blockchain. It is not the voice of the community, or as some people have sort of tried to brand it. So governance has to be practical. Governance can't be a massive hurdle to overcome. But also, every time there's a software upgrade to Solana with a new validator client, the validators vote on adopting that, and they vote by upgrading. So new features and new versions are not, activated and adopted until 80% of the stake weight of the network upgrades. So if there's some proposal or some component in a new version that, validators don't like, they just have to not upgrade, right? And they're this is all downstream of the SIMD process too, where there's a vibrant debate on what the right, choices for new features come in. But this applies to feature activation as well. That requires, a high percentage of the network to already adopt the thing before features can be activated. So I think the governance we have actually is quite strong and quite good on the Solana network today. And the foundation is not really a major player in that at all. It's a minor player in how things are set up today.
Can we elaborate a bit on this point you're making, which is an important one? And I think Solana's hit the point now where we have multiple clients, a lot more stakeholders, so to speak. The
Yeah.
foundation is reducing its footprint with initiatives like Coliseum, where we just had Maddie on last
Yeah.
week, kind of spinning that out. So I think philosophically, what's happening in a way is we're kind of decentralizing the blockchain, like and the governance around it. Now, some might point to that as saying like, "Hey, now Solana can't ship as quickly or like fix issues as quickly." And I
Yeah.
think to an extent that has to be true, right? Because what you're saying is, the validators have to decide to implement an upgrade, and now that there's different stakeholders and more decentralization, that might take longer. And in fact, this is kind of what happened with Ethereum over time. It just takes so long for them to ship even the simplest, seemingly the simplest of upgrades to the chain. So I guess from your guys' perspective, the question here is Solana like good enough where updates should only be marginal? Or is there concern that maybe another ecosystem can come in, similar to what Solana did to Ethereum, and like ship on day one with some X amount of performance and overtake it? Like, how do you guys think about that?
So I don't think those are two mutually exclusive outcomes. I don't think you have to stop doing ambitious engineering or you have to be fully centralized, right? I don't think those are two accurate trade-offs. And one of the great examples of this is the Fire Dancer program. So Fire Dancer, is aiming to 100x the performance of the Solana network. And it won't do that on day one, but that is the goal set for the project. And what those engineers are doing is largely rewriting systems from the ground up in, more efficient ways, partially because it's written in C, but partially because they're building off of now closer to final blueprint as opposed to having to make things get along as you go. That 100x performance is still a lofty goal and is still meaningful for everyone on the network, but that actually does not require any protocol level changes to make something like that possible. This is just refinement of the existing protocol at a faster pace. Additionally, the work that's required to ship a lot of these new features is often not dramatic, right? A lot of the stuff that's being proposed now on Solana, it is more sort of outside of the protocol level. It's on execution, it's on fee markets, it's on different mechanisms like that. SIMD 110 is a pretty vibrant and contentious debate going on right now. But these things are great, and I don't think they have to be. There's how would I say this? Solana has always been a very pragmatic chain when it comes to solutions and implementation. I don't think we're going to lose any of that. Some speed will be lost, sure. But the other way to think about this is if you now have four validator clients built out on the network, maybe you just need three of them to support a new feature. And a little bit of back pressure on the fourth to ship a little faster next time isn't the worst thing in the world.
You've had a number of conversations recently with David from Bankless, and
Yeah.
I think the goalposts seem to keep moving, but I think his current critique of Solana is could Solana withstand a state level attack? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think we've ever seen a state level attack on any network. So I think it's pretty hard to say any network today could survive a state level attack because we're just guessing at the end of the day, right? I
I
mean,
think
like
that the Tornado Cash is the example that he uses for Ethereum.
Tornado Cash was not a state level. This is I have a lot of respect for David. That is a pretty disingenuous argument. It's not like Ethereum got sanctioned. One contract on Ethereum got sanctioned. And plus, we've already seen like there's a lot of OFAC compliant blocks on Ethereum. It's the vast majority of block builders are now following all the OFAC compliance requirements. So, if the actual Ethereum network itself was sanctioned, what would happen? 50% of Ethereum runs on AWS. Now that could certainly migrate to home stakers, but how heavy are these sanctions, right? Like, I think there's things that are illegal but very easy to do, like to pirate movies, right? BitTorrent is not blocked by Verizon. BitTorrent is not, whatever. Whereas there are other things and other types of activities that your ISP will block you on. So, what level of state attack are we actually talking about here, right? And this is kind of where a lot of these talking points start to break down is when you really get into the details of it. The monopoly of violence that a state has is quite extreme, especially a state the size and power of the United States. And if the United States determines that there will be no Bitcoin, no ether traded in the United States, it's gonna, probably crash that cryptocurrency by 95% of value, 90% of value. And this doesn't mean the network is going to die, right? You can't actually kill an open source network like Solana or Bitcoin or Ethereum. But what state does it survive in? Does it actually survive in a state that we think it's part of the global financial future that we think it is today? Probably not. Um, so this is kind of one of these like what are we actually getting at this point? It's sort of the question of like, okay, so you've got your bunker in North Dakota and you're pretty sure you can survive the first wave of the zombie apocalypse. What's your future like? Like The Walking Dead, that does not seem like everyone's pretty happy, right? The Last of Us is not a vision of a world I necessarily want to live in. So survival for survival's sake, I think is often talked about as somehow inherently virtuous. um, this is not answering your question, by the way. Could
No, no.
Solana survive a state level attack? I don't know. I think it probably has about as much chance as any of the major cryptocurrencies do of quote unquote surviving a state level attack from, one of the G7 countries. That's about the best answer I can give you because we don't even know what a state level attack really would look like.
Yeah, and it would look different, I guess, for Bitcoin versus all these POS chains.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, Bitcoin in some ways is much easier to censor because all you're doing is knocking miners off, right? Whereas, like, for proof of stake networks, you actually have to acquire the stake to be able to
right.
interfere with it, right? The classic state level attack on Bitcoin is the US government instructs Raytheon and Global Foundries and Intel to start building Bitcoin ASICs. And they spend $1 billion, and suddenly 55% of the hash power is run by the US federal government and they can attack Bitcoin. Now, there's a high cost to attack Bitcoin, but it's actually not that high of a cost compared to what the US military budget is.
Right.
So there's a lot of these sort of arguments where, any persistent attacker with enough pool of capital or with a big enough gun, for lack of a better term, is going to be able to pose a threat to any of these networks the same way that North Korea, a very small country that is largely pretty unimportant, can exercise global influence because it has nuclear weapons. And this is the push and pull of a globalized world is you can never build something that's truly protected and truly immune. Our goals with blockchain though are actually not to fight state level actors in that way. It's to convince people all around the world that there's a better model and you can build better, fairer economic systems built on blockchain, and that is actually the pressure that is going to make these networks be able to survive a state level attack. It's that they have a broad base of support from citizens, so the state level attack is never politically viable or possible. The same way that, in the United States, a state level attack on firearms is not possible because culturally that is something that Americans have decided is really important to them and value. You could say the same thing with the food system in Europe, right? There's all of these sorts of things that have now become so socially powerful that they're functionally impossible for a government to censor. And that's the goal with blockchain. And that's actually the way that a network survives a state level attack It's not by, having later hardware requirements for validators.
Yeah, no, that's actually a very good way to put it. Um, and it kind of reminds me actually of this kind of closing question or topic, which is something I think you've mentioned a number of times on your own podcast and with us before. A lot of the problems that crypto aims to solve don't have anything to do with technology. It's about the humans and human coordination.
Always
Uh,
has been.
yeah, can you elaborate on how you got to that conclusion and maybe I don't know, like for instance, I see this play out literally with just like DAOs from back in the day where people
Yeah.
thought it was all about the multi-sig and just having coordination and really, people just have apathy and these things just didn't really work out the way we thought they would initially.
Yeah. I don't mean to say technology is easy, but like the biggest problems facing social networks are people. Right? It is content moderation, it is content censorship, both in the good way and the bad way. It is, you know, is this joke actually a joke or is this an attack on someone? Are these people friends and they're bullying each other or is this actual bullying, right? All of these things are just at the end of the day fundamental human problems. They're not technology problems. And yes, we can work to minimize or address some of the problems through technology, but no amount of code is going to stand up and, fix a problem like social cohesion. That is fundamentally a human governance problem, and technology can make it work or make it worse or make it better,
Yeah.
but it's fundamentally up to people to figure out, right? This is the classic problem that Linux has been going through for generations of computer scientists at this point, which is how do we decide what's in the kernel? How do we decide what release is the right release? Why are there 45 distributions of Linux? Because people don't agree on stuff. And so some of, this is the messy human governance part. And, just like countries sometimes fracture when there's, insurmountable differences, we saw Bitcoin fracture when there were insurmountable differences. We saw
Yeah.
Ether fracture when there were insurmountable differences. This is why we have Bitcoin Satoshi's vision and we have ETH Classic, right? And all these sorts of different like networks. And so the challenge for I think all blockchains over the long term is to build strong enough social governance and social cohesion mechanisms that you can solve most problems, and the ones you can't solve, they're minimized to the point of not disrupting the long-term future of the network, which is not a
Yeah.
technology problem. That's a
Y-
people problem.
and it feels like I'm still bullish, like DAOs, for instance, but that just
Sure.
feels like too many other components need to get kind of figured out over time. That feels like one of the maybe last things we'll see go mainstream, so to speak, versus like payments. That is more of a technological problem, literally. I mean, aside from I guess the regulatory side, it's
Yeah.
just about having cheaper fees and faster settlement and things like that. If from that standpoint, maybe that's kind of a spectrum in some sense. Looking forward, like what are you, I guess, most keen on or excited about? I know you mentioned DePIN. Are there any other areas that you think you're seeing the early innings of that are exciting to you?
Yeah, I wanna go back to what you said about DAOs for 1 second,
Yep.
though, because I think there are examples of DAOs that are actually doing really awesome work now. I think Alliance DAO, Builder
Yep.
DAO, and some of the Helium sub-DAOs are actually, like, they're doing what they're set out to do, and the cool thing about, like, the Helium sub-DAOs is it's like, a way for something like the the people who run helium infrastructure in a specific region where there's a debate around what radio frequency standard should they use because they're technically covered in two jurisdictions. A DAO is actually the perfect framework to solve that kind of question. How much money should we spend on a billboard is a terrible question for a DAO to attempt to solve. Right. And so I think it all depends on applying the right types of questions to organizations and to not offload technical and bureaucratic expertise too much. Like, I don't want a DAO auditing, the spending of a company. I want an auditor auditing the spending of a
Yeah.
company, but I want the DAO doing other types of things. So I think there is a future for DAOs. I just think they've been
For sure.
it's like direct democracy. It's just very messy and hard to make that work, and we can create other systems on top of it.
Yeah.
Before you answer what
Yeah.
you're excited about in the future, are you a fan of what's happening with MetaDAO at the moment and the implementation of Futarchy?
I am actually not that up to date on what they've been doing. I've seen a lot of people tweeting about it in the last few days, and I gotta go do some research. So I do not have any opinion yet.
check out our episode with Profit. Might be a
There we
good place to
go.
start too.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a good point though you made about direct democracies. I mean, some would argue that maybe that's not even a good way to govern. Period. But in some ways, we have this. That's a great thing about crypto is we can experiment with all these types of governance structures at a rapid pace. And even with MetaDAO too, and Robin Hanson, who kind of invented that concept of futarchy in 2000, now he's seeing
Yeah.
this experiment play out in real time. That's pretty insane.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these cool things where crypto is such a like a trial by fire for ideas.
Yeah,
And the bad part about that is the hype often gets ahead of the product and then you end up with friend tech. But the good part
yeah,
about that is sometimes you end up with Bitcoin or the idea of a smart contract, right? These are all things that were functionally invented by people at one point and seemed crazy at the time. So I'm not worried about stuff that doesn't stick and goes away. We just got to keep this spirit of experimentation in crypto and also keep honest about what's working and what's not.
And I think Sal asked what you were particularly excited about looking
Yeah.
ahead.
So I think there's kind of two pretty divergent paths for crypto I'm excited about. One is the consumerification of the crypto technology. I think we're on a really awesome path here where Jupiter is 10 times easier to use than Uniswap, and that's nothing against Uniswap. They're just like they're targeted at different types of consumers. And we're going to see that experience just improve and increase across DeFi. And I really think that when we start to get real usable sort of banking systems, for lack of a better term, built on chain, that's going to be a major, major unlock for retail adoption as well. The flip side of that are the final hope of real world assets coming to blockchains. Real world assets are most of the traditional financial space. They're actually a much larger category than your pure synthetic and pure financial non real world asset products. And so this is an area that if blockchain really is going to disrupt finance and really change the way this stuff works, real world assets really have to be a part of that vision in that future. And, I think the tooling and the technology and the performance is finally there. And also, quite frankly, the regulatory frameworks are getting there too. We're seeing a lot of interesting work done in Singapore and Dubai and Japan and even in the United States to, open up these sorts of products and services to being built on blockchain.
awesome. Good way to frame the what to look for ahead. Austin, this has been a really fun conversation. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to jump on. Would also
Yeah.
encourage our listeners to check out Validated. Very good podcast. Been around for a very long time and amazing guests as well.
Thanks. This was really fun. Thanks for having me on.